Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be looking at species barriers. Now, last time we met, we looked at something called speciation. That was how species evolved into two different species over time. So today we are going to look at what we call species barriers, or barriers to this speciation process. So in these examples, we're going to be looking at items that are in place that prevent convergent evolution. So last time we talked about convergent evolution. We'll go ahead and sketch this out again. So I'm going to use color here. So we talked about convergent evolution. And it's this idea where if we have, sketch out our graph, we have time over here, and we have kind of like species differences over here. Convergent evolution would be this idea that as time goes on, these species are becoming more and more similar, right? And it's due to selective pressures. If for whatever reason, though, they're able to hybridize and breed, then we could potentially get one species from that, a new hybrid. So these barriers that we're going to look at today are going to be things that will, these will be things that will prevent interspecies reproduction and convergence. So it's going to prevent this interspecies reproduction here and convergence. So it's almost like there's a wall between these two, right? And this would be called, this is hybridization, hybridization. So we have two groups. We have a group that happens before a zygote is formed. So group one is going to be called pre-zygotic. So pre-zygotic barriers, and these are going to be barriers that do not allow mating success. So we have no mating success in pre-zygotic barriers. And a zygote, remember, is a fertilized egg. So if a sperm meets the egg that is not fertilized, it can form a zygote. So these are things that keep that from occurring. And we're going to look at some examples. So the first one, we'll just letter them off here, is habitat isolation. Habitat isolation. We'll give you an example here. So when we think about our big cats, when we think about lions and tigers, they are able to breed, and they do form this hybrid called a liger or a tie-in. But because there's no habitat overlap, if we look at habitat range, we really don't have much of a habitat overlap. In fact, we don't have any habitat overlap between lions that are pictured here in blue and tigers that would be here in purple. There's just no overlap of the habitat, right? The Africa and Asian continent here, we just don't have any overlap between the two. So although they can hybridize, um, they're not going to because again, there's this habitat isolation. They're separated by just too vast a distance. So we'll go ahead and put this down here that lions, again, native to Africa, and tigers, native to Asia, although they can breed and form a hybrid, there's no habitat overlap for them to have the opportunity to do so. Ligers happen to be the biggest cats, in the world, but ligers, male ligers are sterile, or females aren't sterile, but again, they have this geographic difference, so they're not going to be breeding in the wild. And because you have this sterile male hybrid, we don't have like a separate species for a liger at this moment in time. Second thing we're going to look at here is mating season. So put a letter B here, and we'll look at mating season. We'll look at an example of mating season. So here we have these two species of frog. So let's say there are two species of tree frog, but they have slightly different breeding seasons. Let's say this frog here breeds in April, and this frog here breeds in May. So they'll be laying their eggs, and the male will be fertilizing in two completely different months, 4 weeks apart. So because the breeding season is different, there is no opportunity for the two species to hybridize into one. So that would be a mating season type of difference. So we'll go ahead and list our example here. So we'll say with mating season, we have two frog species with just a 4 week different breeding season. Next item on the list, we'll look at behavioral. And we'll get a look at a behavioral example. So here we have the eastern and the western meadowlark that look really, really, really similar. It would be really difficult to discern the difference between these two if you saw them out in the wild. They each have distinctive courtship songs, and that prevents hybridization from these two. So they don't breed with one another. They don't recognize each other as the same species, so they don't breed. So we have a clear western meadowlark and an eastern meadowlark, although they're similar, their appearance is so similar. Again, because of these different mating behaviors, they remain separate species. So we'll go ahead and list this down. We'll say the songs of the eastern and the western meadowlark. Moving on to D, we're going to have some anatomical barriers in place. So here we have a Great Dane and a Chihuahua, and these two individuals, the act of mating just would not work with the anatomical features that they have. So that's an anatomical barrier. Again, we'll just go ahead and list that down. That Great Dane and the Chihuahua. I So we have that barrier. And then finally, the last one in the pre-zygotic category is this gamete incompatibility. And we see this a lot in aquatic ecosystems. Give you an example of this one. So here we have the purple sea urchin and the red sea urchin. Now, when the sea urchins breed, they'll lay eggs, and then the male sea urchin will release sperm over the top of those eggs. Now, even if these organisms are breeding at the same time, the receptors on the gametes are incompatible, and the red and the purple species here cannot interbreed because there's a molecular protein difference on the eggs and the sperm. So you will not get successful breeding. Same thing happened with plants and pollen when they breed. the receptors, the protein receptors on the pollen, is only specific to um, the ovule of a particular type of plant. So a lot of times you'll get crossbreeding that can occur. In some cases it can, but in other cases it can't. So again, gamete incompatibility here prevents hybridization. So again, our example here is the purple and the red sea urchin. So that does it for the prezygotic barriers. The other piece of this we're going to look at are the post-zygotic barriers. So post-zygotic would be after a zygote is formed. So we do have successful breeding or successful mating. But we have some other mechanism preventing convergence. Or we're calling this hybridization. So let's give these a look. The first one we're going to look at here is called a frail hybrid. So here we have this salamander, and it's the offspring of two different species of salamander. When they breed, they do produce this offspring here, but it's frail and it fails to thrive. And the odds of this breeding with another hybrid or even backbreeding to one of the original salamander species is very low, just because it struggles to meet its nutritional needs. So this would be an example of a frail hybrid that's produced. So we'll go ahead and record our example here, this salamander hybrid that falls into the frail category. We've somewhat talked about this earlier with the liger. The male ligers are sterile, so we have a sterile hybrid where they cannot breed successfully. We have another good example of this here that we'll look at. So if you breed a male donkey and a female horse, you get a mule, which is a common working animal on farms. But that mule is sterile and it cannot breed, backbreed, or have mules itself. So that would prevent hybridization. So we'll go ahead and record that here as a mule as our example. And then finally, the last post-zygotic mechanism is hybrid breakdown. It's an example for this one as well. So here we have two different species of rice. So let's say that you wanted to try to breed and hybridize some rice species to get offspring to grow better, maybe in more arid environments or colder environments. So you breed those together, and then let's say that you get an effective hybrid, but in the next generation or future generations, what results are feeble and or sterile, stunted offspring. So this would be the hybrid losing that hybridization, reverting back to either one of the parent species or just a stunted offspring that doesn't really thrive. So again, what we would do here, we'll just say that this can happen a lot in rice or plants in general where we can lose that hybridization. So those are species barriers. I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you next time.